Welcome to Lady Recaps with an amazing recap of the 2009 movie Law-Abiding Citizen. In it, the hero went rogue against the whole justice system for the vengeance. In the opening scene, city of Philadelphia was shaken by a brutal crime. Late in the evening, two robbers broke into Clyde Shelton's house. Rupert Ames and Clarence Darby immobilized and injured the owner, and then ruthlessly killed his wife and little daughter right before his eyes. The criminals were soon apprehended and handed over to the authorities. A young assistant prosecutor, Nick, took on the case. Shortly before the trial, Nick informs the grief-stricken Clyde that there is not enough evidence for the charges, so they agreed with Darby that he would testify against Ames in exchange for a reduced prison sentence. Upon hearing this, Clyde pleads with Nick not to make a deal with Darby and ensure fair punishment. However, citing the workings of the legal system, he tells Clyde that the deal has already been made. As a result, the thief Rupert Ames was sentenced to death, and the murderer Clarence Darby received a 3-year prison sentence. Leaving the courthouse satisfied, Darby shakes Nick's hand, which a disappointed Clyde notices from afar. 10 years later, Nick with his assistant, Sarah Lowell, goes to witness Rupert Ames's execution. Apparently, Sarah is visibly nervous as she is witnessing execution first time. Noticing this, Nick reassures his colleague that after the painless injection, the person simply falls asleep forever. However, after the sentence was carried out, Rupert Ames died in terrible agony, and his last words were, "You're executing the wrong man." Concerned about what happened, Nick consults with his colleagues that the lethal injection apparatus may have been intentionally tampered with by someone. However, soon they bring him an empty drip with the words "You can't escape fate" scratched on it. And Nick remembers that the same words were once uttered to him in court by Clarence Darby. Immediately, along with his colleagues, he sets off after the criminal. Meanwhile, Darby, having fun in his apartment, receives a call from an anonymous person warning him about the approaching cops. The newfound guardian angel orders the criminal to flee through a police car nearby with a stunned driver inside. Without hesitation, Darby gets into it, and that's when it hits him. Bravo! The driver pulls out a gun and orders him to leave quickly. Soon, the driver unexpectedly takes off his wig and glasses, revealing himself to be Clyde Shelton. Recognizing him, Darby tries to shoot him. But unexpectedly, needles spring out from the handle of the gun and pierce his hand, causing him to grimace in pain. The triumph in his eyes fades as he informs the criminal that he has just been paralyzed by a special toxin called tetrodotoxin, which doesn't affect the nervous system but leaves the victim able to feel pain. Later that evening, Clyde brings the immobilized and terrified Darby to an abandoned warehouse, where he carefully applies tourniquets to prevent him from bleeding out prematurely. An injection of adrenaline prevents the killer from blacking out, while across from him, suspended opposite a mirror displaying a photograph of Shelton's slain family, Clarence Darby is left to endure the process. Clyde clearly relishes in exacting his revenge upon the murderer of his family, documenting every gruesome detail on camera. The next day, the police discovered Darby's mutilated body and quickly realize that Clyde is the only one with a motive. On the same day, Shelton arrests him. However, the investigation faces a real challenge as there is no direct evidence against Clyde. Nick poses a series of simple and straightforward questions to the suspect, to which Clyde responds evasively. When Nick was leaving, Shelton declares that proving his guilt in court won't be possible. Clyde accuses Nick of negligence, stating that he merely wished them dead and envisioned their murders in his head. Furthermore, he could have been framed, just like Darby, a drug dealer, could have been killed by someone like himself. Therefore, the jury will likely sympathize with Clyde, who lost his family. However, if Nick ensures good bedding with an orthopedic mattress for Clyde, he'll receive a sincere confession from him. Meanwhile, a courier delivers a disc containing a video recording of Darby's murder to Nick's house, greatly frightening his wife and 10-year-old daughter. Learning of this, Nick becomes enraged and finally yields to obtain a confession and put Clyde behind bars. Soon the trial takes place. However, Clyde doesn't keep his word and informs the judge that the prosecution lacks sufficient evidence of his guilt. So if he isn't released on bail, Clyde will consider it a violation of his constitutional rights. To further convince the judge, Shelton mentions a fictitious precedent, and the judge, believing his words, is ready to release him. But suddenly, Clyde starts insulting the woman, accusing her of believing his lies and almost letting him go home, even though he killed 2 people. Shelton is certain that because of such ignorant judges, hundreds of criminals are released every day. Enraged, the judge denies Clyde bail and he is returned to prison. The next day, as expected, Clyde gives Nick a heartfelt confession regarding the Ames and Darby case. And when Nick is about to leave, Clyde unexpectedly offers him a new deal. If, precisely at noon, they bring him a big juicy steak with a side dish and play music in his cell, Clyde will reveal where to find Bill Reynolds, Darby's attorney, who went missing 3 days ago. Reluctantly, Nick decides to fulfill his request but arrives 8 minutes late due to the prison. Despite this delay, Clyde provides the coordinates. Meanwhile, Shelton brutally murders his cellmate with a steak bone, and he is transferred to solitary confinement. Soon Nick discovers a small stash in the ground near Reynolds' dead body, with an oxygen mask on his face. It turns out that the oxygen stopped flowing to him at exactly 3:15 from the prison. So if Clyde had been served lunch on time, the lawyer would have survived. Disappointed, Nick returns to the prison and asks Shelton why he tortured and killed his victims. Clyde replies that people must be held accountable for their words and actions. Then Nick returns a bracelet made by his daughter, Hajra, to Clyde and asks if his deceased wife and daughter would approve of the killings carried out in their name. Clyde objects, claiming that it doesn't matter to him. Meanwhile, Nick's assistant Sarah finds some interesting information. Clyde has several paid bills from the Ministry of Defense and 9 real estate properties initially registered to him and then transferred to a Panamanian corporation. District Attorney John Sartnell decides to use his old connections and together with Nick, arranges a meeting with a government spy. He informs them that Clyde Shelton is a natural-born strategist specializing in non-contact operations and capable of killing anyone remotely. The Ministry of Defense has always consulted him. In those cases where discreet elimination of undesirable individuals was needed, no evidence would be left behind. So if Clyde wants to get rid of someone, no one can stop him. Therefore, the best way to stop him is simply to shoot him in his cell. Concerned, Nikki Jonas visits the federal judge the next day and persuades her to place Clyde in full isolation, as he is much more dangerous than he seems. The judge agrees, but before she can sign the appropriate document, she is killed by an explosive device planted in her phone. Nick returns to the prison and tells Shelton that vengeance won't bring his family back. However, his words enrage Clyde, who declares it's not vengeance but a war he has declared on the entire broken and corrupt justice system. Clyde then presents Nick with a new demand: either release him by 6 p.m. and drop all charges, or he will kill everyone. Naturally, Nick refuses, and with Sarah, he begins checking the cases of all inmates in the prison, suspecting Shelton has an accomplice. However, by the end of the workday, Nick deeply regrets his decision. 6 Justice Department employees' cars are blown up, and among the dead is Sarah Lowell, whom Nick valued highly and had been grooming as his successor. Later, near the prison wall, police find a radio transmitter that activated the bombs in the fuel tanks. Fearing for his family's lives, Nick sends them away on vacation. He returns to the prison and confronts Clyde, demanding to stop killing innocents. Clyde replies that if Nick hadn't surrendered, even if he lost the trial and Ames and Darby didn't betray him, Nick exerted all his efforts to ensure justice was served, but he failed to do so, and now Clyde vowed to dismantle this corrupt system. After Sarah Lowell's funeral, Jonas, accompanied by bodyguards, goes to a press conference on the deaths of employees, unaware that there is someone else besides him at the cemetery. An unknown person remotely controls a robot equipped with an arsenal of weapons that first disables all electronics in the cars and then shoots and explodes Jonas' car. Completely crushed by what happened, Nick resigns. However, Mayor April appoints Nick as the new district attorney instead of Jonas. After that, the mayor declares a state of emergency in the city, and they focus on Clyde Shelton's case. Unexpectedly, Nick receives a letter from Sarah's boyfriend, Chester, who decides to help the investigation and sends a list of Clyde's expenses for the purchase of industrial properties over the last 10 years. Shocked by the data, Nick discovers that Shelton owns a huge warehouse right next to the prison. Together with his colleague Dan Nigan, he immediately goes to the address and finds an underground tunnel in the premises. Following it, the men find a variety of clothing, blueprints of government buildings, radio transmitters, and monitors broadcasting images from the prison cameras. They soon discover tunnels leading to all the prison cells. However, Shelton's own cell is empty. Meanwhile, Clyde, disguised as a janitor, effortlessly enters the City Hall building and leaves a powerful bomb right under the conference hall, where the mayor was to hold a closed meeting in an hour. Realizing that Clyde intends to kill government officials, Nick Danningen goes to the City Hall, asking the police to send reinforcements so that Shelton doesn't suspect anything. On one of the floors, Nick notices a janitor's cart and rushes there with a bomb squad. As he suspected, in the empty hall stood a lone suitcase. Carefully peeking inside, the bomb squad discovers a device capable of blowing up the entire floor and the two above it. As Nick predicted, Clyde returns to his cell and is greatly surprised to find a bomb under his bed. Soon, there is a powerful explosion, and Clyde Shelton dies clutching the bracelet his beloved daughter gave him on the day of her death. In the final scene, Nick, for the first time in many years, goes to a concert hall to listen to his daughter's performance together with his wife. And the movie ends here. This recap was amazing and you can watch more by clicking on the screen.